It is common in Romanian churches
to actually have multiple speakers. I was in different kinds of settings, depending on who the speaker is. There's a church in Brooklyn Center. It's a Moldovan Romanian Baptist church. The Romanians will make the distinction. They're Romanian speakers from Moldova. And if you don't know, Moldova is a little country between Romania and Ukraine in the eastern mountains, Transylvanian mountains. And so half the country speaks Romanian, the half that's on the Romanian side of the mountains, and the other half speak Russian or Ukrainian, the ones that are on the eastern side of the mountains. Anyway, they have a church, a Baptist church in Brooklyn Center, very close to our house, and on occasion I would visit there. And it was common on Sunday evenings, in their Sunday evening service, for them to have two preachers. That was a common occurrence. In Romania, the church that I usually attended, the Sunday school hour so they would have a prayer service that lasted an hour, then they would have the Sunday school hour, and then they would have the morning worship. And they were usually together then, close to 4 hours or so, 4 to 5 hours. In that church, and I think I may have told you this before, or someone, because there's no clock in the auditorium here, and in that church they had redone a church auditorium, remodeled it. And the pastor would look at the clock, and then he would end his sermon. And the deacons came to him and said, "We want you to stop doing that. So we're removing the clock out of the auditorium so that you feel free to preach as long as you want to." Now, he had been cutting himself off at an hour. And in Romania, they only especially under communism, you only get together once. So you want your money's worth, right? And if you didn't preach for an hour, then the people weren't getting their money's worth. And they didn't necessarily throw tomatoes at you or anything, but it was like, no, you got to keep going. But anyway, in the Sunday school hour, they would actually do that. Someone would give the Sunday school lesson, and there would be 2 or 3 men who would then stand up and give not necessarily a response, but would comment on his Sunday school lesson. Right then and there, it was part of the lesson. And they had to also do some preparation for that. But it was from 1 Corinthians 14 that they were actually doing that in the church. Anyway, that's an aside. That was free. But that won't cost you anything. Not on the test. Not on the test. Okay, I want my glasses. This is what I'm after. So, Hebrews chapter 11.
Oh, Eric, before you get any further, that stand is unreliable. You've got coffee on it, I'm just telling you.
Yep.
Okay.
We're good.
It comes off the post, the stand.
Oh.
I'm
just by itself?
Yeah, well, if you touch it wrong, it might just decide to float away.
Okay.
It's happened to me twice today. I'm just. Does that have to do with spiritual gifts? No, it has to do with a bolt and a screwdriver.
Okay. So Hebrews chapter 11. Now, we talked last time about Hebrews 11. We took a little, I won't call it a rabbit trail, because Corey wasn't here, but it was a little side track, a little side path, talking about creation. Because the doctrine of creation out of nothing, creatio ex nihilo, does not come from Genesis 1, it comes from Hebrews 11. And from Hebrews 11, verse 3. Now, by way of a review, we remember that Hebrews 11 is coming after Hebrews 10. That makes sense. The Hebrews 10 ends in verse 39 by saying, "We are not of those who shrink back and are destroyed, but of those who have faith and preserve their souls. So Hebrews 11 is really an encouraging rabbit trail, if you will. It's an illustration, a very long illustration, talking about what faith is. So then Hebrews 11:1 says, now faith is the assurance of things hoped for. So it's a natural question. Well, if we live by our Christian lives, and this is not saving faith, this is how we live out our Christian lives. If I'm living out my Christian life by faith, what is that? And what does it look like? And that's what Hebrews 11 is all about. What is it and what does it look like? So faith is the assurance of things hoped for. So we see faith and hope tied together again, which we saw in 1 Corinthians 13, which we just read this morning. The conviction of things not seen. And again, this word not seen is not just things that we're unable to detect because they're too far away or they're, in another room or, they're too small. This is the spiritual world. Okay, that the spirit world is the world that's unseen. And so we understand that our faith is the conviction of things that we cannot physically touch, taste, smell, feel, hear. If I got the 5 senses in there. We can't detect by those things. And that is what faith is. So by faith we understand that the universe was created by the Word of God, so that what is seen was made by things which are not visible. Can I do that? Because I'm looking down too far, I can't breathe. I'm just like totally all messed up here. Okay. All right, so what I'd like to do today is go ahead and read through Hebrews 11. And Hebrews 11 is an encouragement. I mean, just reading through this should be an encouragement to us. It really should lift up our hearts and strengthen our faith. Not in a magical way, but as we get a picture of, as we understand, when we think of these Old Testament stories, especially of what it means to live by faith. And what does it mean to have a conviction of things which are not seen? And he'll go on, the author is going to explain that. So he says in verse 4, by faith Abel, and you'll notice that the refrain, of course, and this is not new, right? We all know this, but if you listen to that refrain, by faith, Abel offered to God a more acceptable sacrifice than Cain, through which he was commended as righteous, God commending him by accepting his gifts, and through his faith, though he died, he still speaks. In what way does Abel still speak? He still is an example to us of living out that faith by doing what was right, even though his own brother wasn't happy about the fact that Abel did what was right. And of course, the still speaking refers to Genesis 4, and his blood crying out from the ground. Verse 5, by faith, Enoch was taken up so that he should not see death, and he was not found because God had taken him. Now before he was taken, he was commended as having pleased God. And this again goes back to Genesis 5 and the story of Enoch. So Enoch is one of 2 men in the scriptures who, as far as we know, had never died. Verse 6, and without faith it is impossible to please God, for whoever would draw near to God must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who seek him. So this is, of course, the thesis statement. By faith, without faith it is impossible to please God, for whoever would draw near. So there's that theme again, that theme throughout the book of Hebrews. We've seen it over and over and over again. How do we draw near to God? In the Old Testament, to draw near to God was a very physical thing. You had to go to Jerusalem. You had to go to the temple. You had to offer sacrifices. If you were a Gentile, you could only go so far. If you were a woman, you could only go so far. Certain priests could go farther. Certain priests, a smaller number of those priests could go farther yet, and only one priest could go into the Holy of Holies one day a year under certain circumstances. Drawing near to God was a very physical activity. in that sense. But we don't have the temple. We don't have the tabernacle. We don't have the physical restrictions. We approach God. We draw near to him by faith. But the only way to do that is to actually believe that he exists. So there's a man, his name is Jordan Peterson. A few years ago, he's a Canadian. He was a psychologist. And a few years ago, he got shy.
If it didn't fall off when you pulled it up, you probably would.
Okay, yeah, sure. So, John wants to hold it? Like, I'm going to trust you with my cup.
He's got his own cup. It's empty. Okay.
So there's this guy. His name is Jordan Peterson. He's a psychologist from Canada. He used to teach at the University of Toronto. And he got himself some notoriety because he stood up against a bill in Parliament and a subsequent lawsuit against freedom of speech. So in Canada, you no longer have freedom of speech. Okay, it's not something, their prime minister has even said, it's not in our constitution, we don't have a Bill of Rights, you do not have the freedom of speech in Canada. Okay, so this has been outlawed, freedom of speech is outlawed in Canada. And he got himself in trouble. Well, then he wrote a book, it's kind of a self-help book, and it actually helped a lot of people, Christians and non-Christians alike, and so he kind of got some notoriety and, became a little bit more popular. But he writes commentaries on different books, and he's enamored by the Christian religion. And he thinks it's essential to our culture, but he is not a Christian. Okay, he's not saved. He doesn't understand the resurrection. He doesn't believe that it actually happened. He doesn't believe the stories in the Old Testament actually happened. He thinks they were just made up to teach lessons. Okay, so by his own admission, okay, he's not a Christian, but once in a while he stumbles on some good truth and some good application, and so he's interesting to listen to in that regard. But anyway, I was thinking about this verse because I was listening to a conversation he was having with a Christian, and actually the Christian was an Eastern Orthodox, so he wasn't even Christian as we think of the term. And that Eastern Orthodox was trying to get him to understand that it's important that the physical resurrection, that Jesus Christ physically rose from the grave, that it actually happened. It was a historical, actual event. And Jordan Peterson he can't wrap his mind around this. And so when we get to a verse like this, here's a man who cannot draw near to God because he does not believe that God exists. And he stumbles over that very fact. He can't get past it. So he can't draw near to him. He doesn't believe that God exists, so he can't draw near to God, even though sometimes it seems like he's getting close, and people have even asked the question in that case, but he can't do it. We have to believe that God exists. And that he's a rewarder of those who seek him means basically this, that what God says is true. And so we talked about this a little bit last week. I asked John last week. Do you remember? I asked John, I said, if you died right now, John, would you go to heaven?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. John has absolutely no doubts whatsoever. Nope. Why? Have we seen heaven? Has God shown us heaven? Have we gone there and eaten something? I mean, have we heard the angels singing? Okay, we don't have any evidence in that sense that heaven's there waiting for us. But what do we have? We have the Word of God. And we know from the Word of God that God always keeps His Word 100% of the time. And if God says to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord, then we can take that by faith. Why? Because we believe that God exists, and we believe that He's a rewarder of those who diligently seek Him. And that's how we live out our Christian life. When we wake up in the morning and we go to bed at night. It's like the old children's prayers, Thomas Tallis, of course, has the morning and evening songs, but, how does it go? Now I lay me down to sleep, a bag of peanuts at my feet. No, not that one. The other one. But, that we entrust ourselves always to God. And if I don't wake up in the morning, well, I will wake up in the morning. The real awakening will take place when I find myself in God's presence. So we live out our lives by this principle. And again, it's all about drawing near to God. This is the theme of the book. And we have to do it by faith. God is not physically present with us, but He is present with us. And we accept that by faith. So we go on in verse 7, and we go into the hall of faith, as it's sometimes called, or continue on. By faith, Noah, being warned by God concerning events as yet unseen, it had never rained on the earth. No rain, ever. And God says, it's going to rain so hard that you need a boat. And Noah said, what's rain and what's a boat? Okay? Because he hadn't seen either one. There's no need for a boat. I mean, I suppose they could have gone out into the sea, but they didn't have a boat. So there's no rain. He'd never seen that. He didn't know what it was. And this goes back to the creation account when there's waters on the earth which are separated from the waters that are up above the earth. Okay, and the firmament and the expanse in between the two. There was a different atmosphere until the time of Noah. By faith, Noah, being warned by God of coming events as yet unseen, in reverent fear, constructed an ark for the saving of his household. By this he condemned the world and became an heir of the righteousness that comes by faith. Had Abraham not had the faith to build the ark, he would have been like everyone else. He would have drowned just like everyone else in judgment. What's that?
You said Abraham.
Oh, sorry.
It's okay, everyone noticed it corrected you in their head.
Well, Lois said that corrected me out loud. Thank you, Lois, for for speaking up. Yes, Noah. My eyes had gone to the next. Okay, verse 8. By faith, Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to a place that he was to receive an inheritance, and he went out not knowing where he was going. Now, some of us do that anyway. We just, anytime we get in the car, we're not exactly sure where we're going. But this is a little different. He had just never been there before. This would be more akin to me saying, hey, let's take a mission trip to Papua New Guinea. Any takers? You guys are like, I've never been. I have no clue what you're talking about. Especially if you've never been in a hot tropical climate. Ku and I were talking a little bit about this yesterday in Thailand. He was telling me that he grew up in a valley where he never saw a sunrise or sunset because the mountains on both sides. And then I was explaining in Papua New Guinea how strange it is that the sun rises at 6 o'clock in the morning and sets at 6 o'clock at night every day. So you don't have long summer nights like you do here in Wisconsin, or wherever I am, Minnesota. Because it's, we get used to the long summer nights here in the early mornings, and there, 6:30 it's pitch black, and you feel like by 7 you're ready to go to bed. It's so dark. It must be 10 o'clock at night, but it's not. Anyway, I don't know where that came from. But Abraham went to go out to a place he didn't know. By faith, he went to live in the land of promise, as in a foreign land, living in tents with Isaac and Jacob, heirs with him of the same promise. For he was looking forward to the city that has foundations, whose designer and builder is God. By faith, Sarah herself received power to conceive, even when she was past the age, since she considered him faithful who had promised. Therefore, from one man, and him as good as dead, were born descendants, as many as the stars of heaven, and as many as the innumerable grains of sand by the seashore. Of course, Abraham didn't get to see this. Sarah didn't get to see this, but he called them out. Now, you'll notice, when we think back to the story of Abraham, when we even think back to the story of Noah, were these people perfect? No. Were they sinless? No. Abraham went out by faith, but when we look at the Abraham story in Genesis, It was, okay, leave your family behind. Well, I'll take my father and my nephew. Okay, no, what part of that didn't you understand? Leave your family behind. And why did you take your nephew? Well, because I don't have any children. But God said, I'm going to make you a great nation. Well, but I can't have children. I'm too old. So maybe God thinks, and then, Abraham gets and we've all done this, right? Well, God says he's going to do this for me, so how is he going to do it? Well, I can't figure it out. Well, stop trying, okay, at that point. If you start to try to figure it out, you've probably gone too far. But we know that that's the true story of Abraham, but you'll notice that what the author of Hebrews is pulling out is that any one of us can live out the Christian life by faith. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to be sinless. You can make some silly mistakes once in a while along the way, Abraham, that can even get you into trouble, Ishmael. But what God is looking at is, how are you living out this Christian life? And so the author of Hebrews is being gracious in showing what it really looks like to live out the Christian life. So verse 13, he comments on Abraham and Sarah and says, these all died in faith, not having received the things promised, but having seen them and greeted them from afar. I mean, there's 400 years between Abraham and, between Jacob and when Israel takes the promised land. So there's over 400 years there. For people who speak thus, make it clear, I stopped. But having seen them and greeted them from afar, and having acknowledged that they were strangers and exiles on the earth, for people who speak thus, make it clear that they are seeking a homeland. If they had been thinking of the land from which they had gone out, they would have had opportunity to return. But as it is, they desire a better country, that is a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared for them a city. Now, what the author has done here is he's kind of wrapped a few things together. So Abraham was called out of his country, of the land of Ur. So the Fertile Crescent, you have the Red Sea over here. He was on this side. He traveled to the other side, to Jerusalem, to Canaan. And he could have, at any time, gone back. Okay, so at any moment, he could have gone back. Jacob could have gone back. Isaac could have gone back. Anyone could have just gone back and said, we're tired of this. We're just going to go back. Okay. Now, remember again, the end of chapter 10 says, we are not of those who shrink back and are destroyed. Okay, but we are those who have faith and preserve our souls. So he's pulling that in here and saying these people could have gone back. They could have shrank back. They could have done that. Now, who else very famously could have gone back? But God wouldn't allow them to. Okay? Well, the people of Israel.
Moses. Yeah.
Why is it that Moses took the people of Israel through the Red Sea? He tells us. So they could not go back. Remember, they could have taken a highway out of Egypt to get where they wanted to go. But what is a highway good for? Moving people this way and that way, right? They could have pulled a U-turn somewhere, found a median in the highway, and crossed over and went back. And it would have been really easy to go back. By going through the Red Sea and pitting themselves out with mountains on one side, the Egyptian army on the other, and the Red Sea on the other, they crossed the Red Sea, and now what have they got? They got the Red Sea behind them with the Egyptian army, which is then destroyed in the sea. And they're in the desert now. They're in the wilderness. They're cut off. They can't go back, not easily. And so God wouldn't allow them to go back because he knew their hearts were weak. Their faith was weak. So he's pulling this in with Abraham, with the people of Israel, because he says if they would have had opportunity to return, they would have. But as it is, why don't they? They desire a better country, that is a heavenly one, where God is not ashamed to be called their God. Now, you remember, the Old Covenant, the vow of the Old Covenant is, I will be your God, and you shall be my people. Okay, so he's alluding to that, pulling the people of Israel out of Egypt, making a covenant with them, that they would pursue the promised land by faith, which they didn't at first, and that he would make a covenant with them. He would not be ashamed to be called their God. Now, he takes all of that, really, bunches it up into like a ball of yarn, and then applies it to us today. And says, well, we aren't looking for a physical country. We aren't promised a physical piece of ground. Okay, the United States isn't the promised land, if I can say that, and neither is any other country. The point is, we're looking for the heavenly country. We're looking for being with God, that city, that heavenly city, the city of Jerusalem, that we're pursuing. So that's why he says it's a heavenly one, verse 16. And God is not ashamed to be called our God, and because he has prepared that place for us. And Jesus himself said, if I go away, I'm going to go prepare a place for you where my Father is, that where I am, you may be also. So that's what we pursue in this life. And really, I mean, this is going to, he fleshes this out a little bit later too. But this is really that idea that in that old kind of bluegrass song that we have, this world is not my home. Okay, I'm just passing through. And it's really at this heart, the heart of this, that we don't, we're pounding in tent stakes in this earth, in this world. We aren't trying to make a permanent dwelling place. And for obvious reasons, we can't, because we're frail and all going to die. So then what? And this is what's inside the heart of man, according to Jeremiah, the eternity in our hearts for seeking that which is more than just what is offered in this life. But as Christians then, we hold on loosely to the world around us. We live here. God has put us here. We have a purpose for being here. We want to live that out. But this world it's not our home, and we are just passing through. In fact, even 1 John 2 that we read in the scripture reading during the morning service, the love of the world is not from the Father. The things that are in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, the pride of life, these things are not from the Father. So, by faith then, we pursue something better. It kind of reminds me of that old joke about the woman who wanted to bring a bag of gold. Have you heard this one? So this lady gets she gets to the pearly gates, and she's got a bag of gold. And Peter says, you can't bring that in here. And she goes, but I saved all this up when I was on earth, and I want to bring it with me. And St. Peter says, but really, you don't need it. Like, you're not going to spend it or anything. He's trying to reason her out of it. She's like, no, I'm going to take it. So he goes, fine, you can take it with you, I guess. And so she's dragging it in, and she's going to go, she's finding her dwelling place in heaven, and she's going to move in, and she passes by a couple angels who are standing there, and one of them says to the other, why do you think she brought a bunch of pavement with her? Because, it's paved the streets are paved with gold. So it's really, the most valuable things on earth are really not worth anything in heaven. Okay, verse 17. By faith Abraham, so we're still on Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac. And he who had received the promises was in the act of offering up his only son, of whom it was said, through Isaac shall your offspring be named. He considered that God was even able to raise him from the dead, that is Isaac, from which, figuratively speaking, he did receive him back. Okay, so this is Genesis 22, and this is Abraham and Isaac. He's getting ready to sacrifice Isaac, and Abraham doesn't comprehend the plan that God has at this point in time. Abraham, for the first time in Genesis 22, Abraham stops trying to figure it out and obeys. And when he does that, he's thinking to himself, here we're told by divine revelation, that Abraham is thinking, I'm going to kill my son, my only son, because that's what God told me I needed to do. But God is able to raise him from the dead. So however God's going to handle the problem, that's on God. I'm going to do what God has asked me to do. And I do that by faith because, again, God is always true to his word. So, verse 20, by faith Isaac invoked future blessing on Jacob and Esau. By faith Jacob, when dying, blessed each of the sons of Joseph, bowing in worship over the head of his staff. By faith Joseph, at the end of his life, made mention of the exodus of the Israelites and gave direction concerning his bones. And that's the story that Joseph wanted his bones buried in the promised land. And that goes along the lines with the Old Testament understanding of the resurrection. In verse 23, by faith Moses, so now we come to Moses, when he was born was hidden for 3 months by his parents because they saw that the child was beautiful and that they were not afraid of the king's edict. The king's edict was to kill all boys. By faith, Moses, when he was grown up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to be mistreated with the people of God than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin, that being, available to him as a member of the household of Pharaoh in Egypt. He considered the reproach of Christ greater wealth than the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking to the reward. So two things here. One, so Moses didn't know about Jesus Christ. This is the author pulling the story of Moses and applying it to us. And also, notice that he says, for he was looking to the reward. The reward. Verse 6, we have to believe that God exists and he is a rewarder of those who diligently seek him. So this is pulling all those ideas back in together. By faith, Moses left Egypt, not being afraid of the anger of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is invisible, that is God. By faith he kept the Passover and sprinkled the blood so that the destroyer of the firstborn might not touch them. So this is all the things that Moses was doing. Moses didn't have a fear of Pharaoh. Moses was pursuing God. And God said, I will go out from before you. So Moses, what the author of Hebrews is saying is that the Exodus, Moses wasn't afraid of Pharaoh and the Egyptian army. He was pursuing after God who was leading him out. That was the direction he was facing. There's a lot that could be said there. Verse 29, by faith the people crossed the Red Sea as on dry land, but the Egyptians, when they attempted to do the same, were drowned. Why? Do you think the Egyptians had faith? Do you think the Egyptian army came to this